Morning.
Good morning.
Notice I did not say good morning. That is because it is not a good morning. In fact, the morning that I am talking about is a different one, the one with a U in it. We're all grieving here. I know that. It's a sad occurrence. I think we all know what we're talking about, and that's not that I'm up here preaching. Instead, well, let's just dive into it. Oh, might help if I turn this on. First, this is the title of the sermon. But let's dive into it. Twitter is dead. Twitter is no more. I knew that's what y'all were thinking when I came up here. It's now X. Why? No one really knows. And it hasn't exactly worked out too well. It's still twitter.com, but it says that it's X. And on iPhones, it's still Twitter because you have to have 2 characters for the app name, so X doesn't work. So, yeah, it wasn't really well thought out. But regardless, Twitter is dead. And I'm sad. I'm devastated. Twitter was the best social media app, and that's not my opinion, that is a fact. It was the best all around, and it is no more. What made Twitter better than Facebook or any other social media was so much. I mean, if you go on Facebook and you scroll, you'll get all these, recommended pages that are just pointless and all that. But Twitter was great. Let's have a moment of silence. Okay, that's long enough. I thought it would be appropriate to kind of go over, some of the best of Twitter, some of the things that made it great. One of the things was just, it was a collection of people who would have a funny tweet, funny idea, they would share it with people, and then it would be retweeted. And it would gain so much popularity that it would eventually find you. And you would see stuff from people all over the world, and it would make you laugh. And some of it, you would see somebody talking about something, have no idea what they were referring to, and you're just like, what is the context behind this? You keep scrolling another minute or two, and then you see it. And it's rewarding. But, so let's go through some of the best of. I wanted to do this kind of a in memorandum video with In the Arms of an Angel, Sarah McLachlan song with all the, sick and dying puppies and all that. I wanted that in the background, but due to time constraints and my lack of skill in video editing, we do not have that. So, but let's look at it. I find it funny. And you'll see stuff like this all the time on Twitter. Sick of having to go to 2 different huts to buy pizza and sunglasses. So true. All right, next one. Pretty good, right? I think that's the last one before I want to get to the one I want to make. Yep. Okay. Those were some of the best of. I got one more, and it actually leads into the sermon, believe it or not. So. We've all been there, right? We're trying to tell a story, and we made a mistake at some point in the past, and there's just that one person that keeps on bringing it up. They won't drop it, and thus the title of my sermon, Will You Just Drop It? I mean, that constant reminder of, hey, you remember that one time you did something that was kind of stupid or made a mistake? I'm just going to keep on bringing it up. And as I came across this recently, it got me thinking. And it reminded me of one thing in particular from the Bible. And that is the story of Eutychus falling out of a third-story window while Paul was preaching and dying, and then having to be raised back from the dead. I just imagine all his friends and stuff being like, hey, you remember that time when you fell asleep while Paul was preaching to us and died? And then you made him come and resurrect you from the dead? That was funny, remember? So let's look into it. The story occurs in Acts 20, verses 7 through 12. I'm reading from the NIV version. On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. Let's stop right there. Okay, I'm starting to understand why he fell asleep. Because it doesn't exactly say how long Paul was preaching by this point, but we know through midnight, and they first started by breaking bread. They first started with a meal. So there's a chance that Paul's been up there for 6 hours talking, at least. So, okay. Some preachers are long-winded, but this takes it to another realm, not even another level. Let's continue. There were many lamps in the upstairs rooms where the people were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. That's a bad sign when the Bible is starting to repeat itself, saying, and Paul's just droning on and on and on, won't stop talking. So we know he's been going at this for hours. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. Don't be alarmed, he said. He's alive. Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. So Paul still wasn't done. After a death occurred, he kept on preaching. I just think it's funny. And I know if I was Eutychus' friend, I would not let him live this down. I would bring it up every possible chance I could. Like, Shannon won't let me really use knives that much because I've cut myself a few times. I imagine, anywhere that Eutychus goes, like roping off the third floor and just be like, can't go up there. You got to stay on the ground floor, okay? But sometimes people just won't drop things, and you really wish they would. As we read this story, a lot of things kind of occur to me. One, he can preach. Just, who knows what he talked about for 12 hours? I'm sure after the resurrection that he performed, he had an idea of something and was just like, let me tell you all the times Jesus resurrected somebody. Who knows? But that Yeah, that's ridiculous. And it got me thinking, what does that actually look like? Not, don't worry, I'm not preaching for 12 hours, but what would a sermon look like in the early church? We're told that they broke bread at least twice, possibly more. And we're talking about Paul preaching for 12 hours. What do we think that actually looks like? It certainly isn't this. It certainly isn't everyone sitting down in an orderly fashion, waiting for the preacher to get done. There's going to be a lot of commotion. There's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be a lot of kids running around. I mean, this is Paul that we're talking about, who is somewhat used to preaching in the middle of a busy street. Kind of on the topic of dropping it, I was talking to Danny a while back. You know, we had a guest who, they had a little child with them, and the child was acting up, was being a little bit of a disturbance. But should it bother us? I mean, how would Paul react to that? And we know, I mean, it's just obvious over a 12-hour span, kids would get fussy, kids would run around, probably jump out of windows occasionally. Who knows? But it's not going to be the orderly fashion of sit there, make no noise, no disturbance whatsoever, and listen to some person go on and on and on and on. That's not how it works. That's not how it worked then, and it shouldn't be expected today. We've gotten to the point where, I don't know, too much order, not enough chaos going on in these sermons. So that's kind of what we're going to bring about today. We're doing multiple of these sermons, mini sermons, if you want to call it, because that's kind of what they did in the old church. They would have multiple people come up, share ideas, share thoughts, all that stuff. They had kids running around, probably around a dinner table with how many times they broke bread. It was in somebody's house. They probably gathered around and ate a meal together. It wasn't this. I mean, if somebody wants to go get a biscuit right now, feel free. It was less structured. They had multiple participants. And going into the next point I have, they probably answered questions that members of the church had. Members of the church probably had a bunch of questions at the time. And whether it's Paul or the leader of a church or a deacon or whatever it may be, they probably tried to answer it as best as they could. And looking at the time, there was a lot of false beliefs that came up. I don't have all of them, but I did a class on it at one point, and there was so many of ideas like Jesus didn't come in human flesh. He was a spirit. He was a ghost that projected himself in a human form. Jesus was adopted by God at the resurrection or crucifixion or when he was baptized, something like that. All these false ideas came up because there were questions from people in the church. We have much more knowledge than they did at that time. We have the full Bible, we have the teachings of Paul, and the Gospels, and it's not just recited by word. So I feel confident that we can teach better than some of the people that just heard a few sermons by Paul and then have to fill in the blanks of the thousands of questions that people would have. But this leads to this. I want to introduce something. You may have noticed this right here. Are y'all ready? Okay, so I don't have one, but imagine this is an idea box. It's a shoebox filled with stuff, but it's the best I could do on such short notice. I think it is a good idea for us to have an idea box, or a suggestion box, if you will. If you have a question, or if you have an idea for a sermon or class or whatever it may be, you can write it down on a card, put it in the idea box. I mean, the reason that I'm up here now is Danny cannot preach currently. Sometimes it's difficult coming up with a sermon, or you have an idea, but it's not fully fleshed out. And something like this where, I mean, I think I'm going a little over, but it's meant to be a 5 or 10 minute little thing, that would be perfect for these. We have people that are capable of researching a topic, coming up with a few points, getting up here and saying their piece. And this is what this would be. If you have an idea come up, if you have a question, whatever it may be, it can be added. I know this is a giant tangent, but a few weeks ago I had the thought of Paul was a Pharisee. He didn't just happen to be a Pharisee after Jesus died. What was Paul doing while Jesus was on earth? Was he one of the ones that was leading for him to be crucified, or was he just kind of off doing his own thing? That would be a perfect thing for the idea box, except for from what I found online, there's no real answer. But that question could be something that's thrown in there and somebody could research, somebody could answer, and it can give ideas for sermons. So, we're going to work on getting an actual one, and you can write down ideas, suggestions, complaints. Although if you do have complaints, just throw them in the trash. But yeah, that's it. It'll help out. It'll give us something to go on. Might spark an idea. It might tie into something that we already have brewing in the back of our minds and help flesh something out. Who knows? So, that's all I got.